Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment teleconference on the proposed Donlin mine, contamination concerns and threats to clean air, clean water, and clean food. My name is Diana DeFazio, and on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, I'll be facilitating today's call. CHE Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. Information at akaction.org and at healthandenvironment.org. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to take a moment to honor the memory of Sandra Ann Madre, who passed away on August 17th after a cancer diagnosis just 4 months earlier. After the mid-1990s, when she suffered a workplace, Sandra became a fierce advocate for environmental health. She Chemical Sensitivities Manitoba to help fellow sufferers and to lobby government. She advocated for progressive chemical regulation, sitting on the National Stakeholder Advisory Council for the Chemicals Management Plan, as well as the Canada-United States Regulatory Cooperation Council. And as a member of the Children's Health and Environmental Partnership in Manitoba, she participated in the drive to eliminate the use of cosmetic lawn pesticides because of her concerns over the effects that these products have on children. Sandra became an active member of Alaska Community Action on Toxics Children's Environmental Health Task Force after making the long trip from Canada to participate in the Children's Environmental Health Summit that we held in Anchorage in 2016. Passionate, intelligent, and caring person dedicated to creating positive change in the world and always had great ideas to share. She also participated in many of our CHE Alaska, and that's why we're honoring her right now. Sandra will be all who knew her for her generosity, quick wit, infectious laugh, and readiness to help those in need, and we will miss her greatly. Our first speaker today is Tom Waldo, and he does have presentation slides that he'll be referring to, so please be sure to download that document now if you haven't already done so. I included a link in an email to you earlier this morning, and it also can be found on our website at akaction.org. And as a reminder, during the last 10 minutes of the call, we'll invite participants to ask questions or make comments. Now it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our first speaker for today. Tom Waldo is the Senior Staff Attorney in the Alaska Office of Earth Justice. Tom develops and litigates a variety of cases in state and federal courts and administrative agencies to protect Alaska's public lands, wildlife, and air and water quality. Cases in his docket have included protection of roadless areas, habitat in the Tongass and Chugach National Forest, legal disposals of state public domain lands, and protection of water bodies from acid mine drainage and other mining-related water pollution. Clients have included local and national environmental groups, tribal governments, tourism businesses, commercial and sport fishing organizations, and municipal governments. Welcome, Tom. You may go ahead and begin. You'll just need to unmute your line first.
Okay, thank you, Diana. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are unmuted.
All right, great. Thanks very much. I do have a PowerPoint. I do not intend to refer to the PowerPoint during my presentation, but I'll be roughly following the outline that's there, and you can follow along if you want. It does include some images, but I don't intend to refer to it. I also want to acknowledge my colleague Iris Korhonen-Penn, who actually did most of the work preparing the PowerPoint for me. Okay, so we're talking about the Donlin mine. Donlin is one of the biggest gold mines in the world, and it is nearing the end of its permitting process. It would be located in a very remote area of Alaska along Crooked Creek, which is a tributary of the Kuskokwim River upstream from Bethel and about 15 or 20 other small, mostly native communities along the Kuskokwim River. It's also directly upstream from the Yukon Delta National Wildlife Refuge. It would be a huge mine. It would about an estimated 1.6 million tons of ore over a period of about 27 mining, and that would follow about 3 to 4 years of construction. The design of the mine, open pit mine, to have two giant pits that would eventually merge, that would become one giant pit. The total pit, when it's fully excavated, would be about 2 miles long by about a mile wide and 1,800 feet deep. When they close the mine, the plan is that this giant pit would fill up with water and form a permanent lake about 2 square miles that would consist of runoff from the waste rock piles and from the tailings, would therefore be contaminated and are expected to never meet water quality standards. And as a result, the lake will require water treatment in perpetuity. The mine will generate a large amount of tailings. Tailings are the slurry that's generated when you crush and grind and process the ore to extract the gold. You get this kind of toxic, contaminated slurry. They will dispose of that into a tailings pond that will be held back by a dam 471 feet high. In total, they expect to have about 600 million tons of tailings in the pond, and it would occupy a space of about 4 square miles, so it'll be even bigger than the mining pit. Similarly, there'll be a vast amount of waste rock generated by the mine. The waste rock is the rock that's excavated but does not contain enough gold ore to make it worth processing in the plant. So that will just be placed into a giant waste rock pile that will also be about 4 square miles, roughly the same size as the tailings pond, except it'll just be a big pile of waste rock, basically a mountain of waste rock that they'll create. They expect about 2.5 billion tons of waste rock, some of which will be acid generating. The mine will require a lot of new infrastructure. It will require a water treatment plant that will average 2,800 gallons per minute of discharge. The mine is in an extremely remote area. You can't drive there from anywhere, and so they will get access to it primarily by barges along the Kuskokwim River. One of the challenges there is that the Kuskokwim River is frozen most of the year, so the barging season will only be about 4 to 5 months, roughly from May to September. And during that time, they expect 122 round trips per year of barge traffic. In order to power the mine, they will use natural gas from Cook Inlet, and that will require a pipeline 316 miles long from Cook Inlet across to the mine site. So that's the basic design and setup of the mine. Let me talk a little bit about some of the impacts of it. They will have to disturb or destroy about 6,500 acres of wetlands. That's total with the mine project and the pipeline all combined. There will be about 10 miles of streams destroyed as a result of the mine. That will be either from being buried in waste rock or tailings, or being excavated through to mine out the gold. And about half of those miles of streams have fish in them. In order to mine, to dig this open pit and mine the ore out of it, they're going to have to draw the groundwater way down. So they're going to be constantly dewatering the site, pumping out groundwater, and that's going to also draw water out of the streams. Nearby Crooked Creek will lose a lot of its water volume, and that will destroy some salmon habitat. And then in addition, all of this barge traffic along the Kuskokwim River is predicted to have cause significant damage to spawning habitat for rainbow smelt, which is an anadromous fish that spawns in the Kuskokwim River and is an important species, not only as a subsistence species, but as kind of but as a prey species for other fish in the river. There will be significant water quality impacts from the mine. The mine is located in a place in what they call a mercury belt, which means there's just a lot of naturally occurring mercury in the area. In fact, there's actually an old mercury mine nearby. The result of this is that in the operation of the mine, there'll be a lot of mercury emissions, most of it fugitive. So all the mining operations, the crushing and grinding of rocks and ore, the traffic, the trucks moving things around, all creates dust that will be mercury laden. In addition, you've got this big tailings pond that will have mercury in it, and they expect that the wind blowing over the tailings pond will cause deposition of mercury that precipitates from that pond. And then in addition to that, you have the smokestack emissions from the operation of the mill itself. And as a result of all these things, you're going to get a fair amount of mercury that will just land on the surrounding lands and then eventually run into the water. And the EIS predicts that you're going to get an increase in violations of the mercury water quality standards in the nearby streams. It's because of the naturally occurring mercury in the area. There already is naturally high mercury content in the streams, and this will make it even higher. Some of the other water quality impacts include arsenic, which will leach from the waste rock into the groundwater and is expected to potentially violate state water quality standards. I mentioned before the dewatering of the mine pit and the resulting reduced water flow in Crooked Creek. That will also have the effect of increasing the temperature in the streams, which would also violate state water quality standards and damage the habitat there. Other water quality risks would naturally come from the risk of a possible tailings dam failure. As I mentioned before, there's a giant 470-foot tailings dam holding back 600 million tons of toxic tailings. There have been examples of catastrophic mine failures in the past. Many of you are probably aware. Just 4 years ago, the Mount Polley mine in BC had this happen. It was a modern mine constructed to modern standards, like Donlin is supposed to be. Nobody thought it could ever fail, but it did, and caused this catastrophic run of tailings running downstream from the mine. That kind of thing could happen here. They're using the same basic kind of design, a dam holding back a pond, and they are not following the recommendations that were made in the wake of the Mount Polley disaster. After the Mount Polley catastrophe, there was a commission appointed to study how to avoid this kind of thing in the future. One of their primary recommendations was to do dry stack tailings, dry storage of tailings rather than wet. It's much more stable, much less of a risk to downstream communities and waters. They're not doing that here. They're going with old-fashioned wet storage of tailings. And then finally, as I also mentioned before, there is, when they close this mine, they will create this permanent 2-square-mile lake that is predicted never to meet water quality standards and will require the permanent operation of a water treatment plant that would always have to remain in place and operating and maintained in order to avoid polluting downstream waters. I wanted to make a brief mention of some of the social impacts. I'm sure Mary will have more to say about that. after me. But this mine is in a very remote area with small communities that largely depend on a traditional subsistence way of life. And into that, we'll be putting this giant mine. There'll be 2,500 workers during the construction period. And then during operations, there'll be over 600 workers, and that's just on site. And there'll be more workers off site as well. And in addition to all these workers, you're going to have this constant barge traffic up and down the river, which is the highway between these communities. And that's going to be not only disruptive to the habitat, not only damaging to the habitat, but disruptive to the residents there and people who use the river. So let me say a few things about the status of the project and where we are in the permitting. The Army Corps of Engineers issued the final environmental impact statement for the project in April of this year, after several years of scoping and then a draft EIS that was subject to public comment. On August 13, so just less than a month ago now, or I guess a month ago, the Army Corps and the Bureau of Land Management issued a joint record of decision approving the project. The reason those two agencies did it together is they both have separate authorizations they had to issue for the mine. For the Army Corps of Engineers, they had to issue the so-called 404 permit. That refers to Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which is what requires you to get a permit from the Army Corps in order to dump any fill material into waters of the United States. So for all the waste rock and excavation and tailings and all that stuff requires filling in streams and wetlands and diverting waters, and all of that requires a 404 permit. So that was the Army Corps' responsibility. In addition to that, they needed to build this pipeline. A significant portion of that crosses federal land that's managed by the Bureau of Land Management. So the BLM had to issue a right-of-way for that pipeline construction. The two agencies did that together in a ceremony on August 13th of this year. Some of the issues that we're looking at in connection with the EIS and the two federal decisions there are the adequacy of the EIS in all of its various respects. With some of the issues that have been highlighted include not only, of course, water quality, but also subsistence uses, the compensatory mitigation plan, and the use of a tailings pond rather than dry stack tailings. In addition to those two big federal permits, there's been a whole sequence of state permits coming across. One of them is the certification by the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation on August 10th of this year. It's called the 401 certification. That refers to Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, and that's the section that requires the state of Alaska to certify that the Army Corps' 404 permit will comply with state water quality standards. We don't think it will. We think there's a lot of reasons to call that into question, particularly given the EIS in the case. Earlier in this presentation, I described some of the water quality impacts from mercury, arsenic, and temperature that are predicted to potentially cause violations of water quality standards. We don't think the state has adequately explained how they can certify this mine in light of those violations, and so we have submitted a request for informal review on behalf of several of the tribes downstream from the mine. And that matter is currently pending before the director of the Division of Water at DEC. Just less than 2 weeks ago, another set of permits of the Title 16 permits issued by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. These are the permits that are required to undertake any activities in anadromous fish streams in Alaska. I'm sure Lindsay will have a whole lot more to say about those, so I won't talk about those any farther. Another important permit requirement coming up. Just on September 6th, groups submitted comment on the proposed reclamation and closure plan for the mine, which is a plan that both DEC and DNR have to approve under their authorities. It's basically the plan for what you do after the mine is all done mining in order to put everything back in place and create a stable and clean site. We think there are significant problems with that. Two things that people have focused on about that are, one is that the bond that Donlin is proposing to post in order to cover the potential cost of that closure should the company go bankrupt is very inadequate. They have significantly underestimated some of the costs for it, which would leave the state and the taxpayers holding the bag if the company should ever go bankrupt. And a second issue about reclamation, more fundamental to the substance of it, that we focused on is the fact that they're relying on water treatment in perpetuity to close this mine. The idea of reclamation and closure generally is you want to leave the mine in a stable condition using natural processes so that you can walk away from the mine and have everything be clean and stable. If you're going to require water treatment in perpetuity, that means you're going to have humans intervening for all time in order to keep the site clean and avoid contaminating downstream waters. In our view, that should not be viewed as leaving the mine in a stable condition and should not be approved by the state. There's some more permits coming up that we haven't seen notices for yet. Most of this mine is mostly on Native Corporation land, but there are state lands nearby that will have to be used for different aspects of the mine, including some road right-of-ways, airstrips, material sites, the pipeline route, things like that. For all those uses of state land, the DNR will have to issue authorizations and leases and the like, and that will require them to make what's called a best interest finding, which is a finding that the disposal of those state lands is in the best interests of the state of Alaska. That'll be a public process that people will have an opportunity to comment on. We expect that in the coming months. Also, the mine still needs to get its water use permits from DNR. That's to be able to draw down water from the streams to use for mining. And they'll have to get a dam safety permit from DNR as well for construction of the tailings dam. And there are, I believe, other state permits coming up as well. So that's a basic overview of the mine and the impact and the current permitting status. In the PowerPoint presentation on the last page, I listed some contacts for myself and for my colleague, Olivia Glasscock, another attorney here in the Juneau office, as well as our legal assistant, Iris Korhonen-Penn. I've got phone numbers and email addresses on the last slide that you can contact us if you like. I'll let people know that I will be on leave for the next 3.5 months. This is my last week, following which I've been granted an extended leave of absence. But we have a good team to cover the project in my absence. And Earth Justice will be continuing to look at these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was an excellent overview of the project and the process and the status of it. So going forward, we're going to have a few other speakers, and then there'll be an opportunity for people that are on the line to ask further questions or make comments. So thanks again, Tom. And now we'll be hearing from Mary Mathias, a longtime resident of the Bethel area. Mary Mathias is the new Natural Resource Director for Aruk-Sagamute Native Council. Mary has been serving the Native Council for a little over 3.5 years, beginning in 2015 as the Environmental Program Coordinator. Mary lived in Nightmute for 19 years, where she worked as the IGAP Program Director for 7 years before moving back to Bethel. She's attended many environmental trainings, collaborated with numerous local organizations through consortiums and outside agencies through the Environmental Network, and she's been building partnerships all along the way. Some of the things that she enjoys include spending time with her family, traveling by boat, and participating in hunting and gathering of subsistence foods. Harvesting salmon is her favorite, along with halibut, herring, white, and lush fish. And so, Mary, if you press *2, you can unmute your line, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So I can't hear you yet. I think if you press *2, I will be able to.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Hi.
Hi.
Anyway, thank you so much for placing this meeting together and bringing people together. And yeah, the Donlin Gold is is very concerning, and the reason why is because they haven't really educated the communities along the Kuskokwim River. There's language barriers also, and one of the things that we were doing here, we created surveys based on the subsistence values and what the knowledge, where their level of knowledge was or is, about the Donlin Gold Mine, and many who have filled out the surveys claim that they highly value their subsistence resources. They enjoy gathering for their families, and it's what they know. And if the Donlin mine goes through, they're afraid that that the tailings dam could break away and contaminate this river, and we're all afraid that we won't be able to participate in gathering subsistence foods anymore, like fish, even the birds that migrate up here, and the moose. There's a lot of animals and fish that we harvest throughout the whole year, and I'm just I'm really thankful to be part of this movement in standing for what we believe in, what we are, what we know, and it's worth protecting. But I don't know what else to say.
This is Diana. Would you like to talk just a little bit about how your Native Council organized around, what you've been doing, your action that you took earlier this summer? Or we can just save time for questions at the end.
Okay. Yeah, we were the first tribe to protest against the Donlin. We held a protest march, and all our staff, ONC staff, along with some other people who, willingly participated, they were very proud. And also I received a phone call from an elder who said, or she told me, she was very thankful that we who are opposing Donlin and standing up against them, because no one else has done it yet, that she's very proud of us, and she wants to continue harvesting subsistence foods, and also for her grandchildren. And she said, while we're opposing and fighting for salmon, for the subsistence resources, to hold our head up high and be proud and don't give up. And so we went out there and we protested, and some of the things that I was saying was, where's your voice? I was shouting out, where's your voice? Because there's a lot of tribes, throughout this region who have been quiet for so long, and they didn't know what was really going on until now that they're finding out that this mine is threatening their way of life. It's what they know, and um,
Thank you, Mary. Is there anything else you'd like to say now, or should we just wait for the time at the end when people may have further questions for you?
probably at the end.
Okay, so you can go ahead and mute your line again, just so we don't get any background noise. And thank you very much. And I'm now going to invite Lindsay Bloom to talk about the group Stand for Salmon and some of the ways people can get involved. So Lindsay Bloom is an Alaskan fisherman and consultant who works with groups to advocate for policies that support salmon habitat protection and sustainable development for Alaskan communities. She lives with her husband, Brian, and 2 small children in Juneau. Lindsay is one of the founders of the Stand for Salmon group and a sponsor of the Yes on One ballot initiative. So welcome, Lindsay.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay. Gosh, I don't know a whole lot about the audience on the call, so I am going to make an assumption. I hope it's an okay one, that most people have heard of ballot measure 1, and just have a little bit of background. And I'll speak quickly about what it's all about, how it's related to Donlin, and then definitely very happy to answer questions. And it's been a total honor for me over the last 6 or 12 months or something like that to get to work with Mary and Tom and all of the other really talented and passionate people who are working on Donlin and living on the Kuskokwim River. And my gosh, it's an awesome, awesome place to get to live and visit and know about. So it's just an honor to have been on the river, to have met some of the voices that are on the phone and all that. The way that ballot measure 1, the Stand for Salmon initiative, kind of ties into all of this is that we put this initiative on the ballot because our current law in Alaska that dictates how we permit large projects in salmon habitat is totally inadequate in terms of guiding the state of Alaska's, leaders and Commissioner of Fish and Game about how we're going to authorize and permit development in salmon habitat. The problem is that right now we basically have about a very short paragraph, one very short paragraph in the law. The language in it says the Commissioner of Fish and Game shall authorize a permit for a diversion, a work, a project, a use, a dam in anadromous waters, which means, salmon-bearing waters in Alaska, so long as the project provides for proper protection of fish and game. And that language sounds really good, like it sounds really clear, like our intent is that when development occurs, we want the Commissioner of Fish and Game to ensure that the fish and game are protected, right? Unfortunately, though, there is no further definition, there's no science, there's no standards, there's no criteria that says when these permits are being issued, proper protection of fish and game means X, Y, or Z. So we're trying to put some meat on the bones of this law. We have tried to do it for decades now, but through, via regulations with the Department of Fish and Game. And ultimately, like administration after administration after administration, from Palin to Parnell to Walker, have been told that really putting these protections in place for fish that will ensure responsible development are so politically contentious that they're just not willing to do it. So we weren't able to do it for many years now, working directly with the Department of Fish and Game. We have tried several times with, I'll back up and say we did put a proposal into the Board of Fish, which is the body in Alaska that was created sort of outside of the legislature with authority to make decisions and regulations about how fisheries are allocated among users in Alaska. And we did work within the Board of Fish process for 2 years, lots of public hearings, lots of expert testimony, et cetera. And the board did conclude that, yeah, our fish habitat protection law is inadequate. And they sent a letter to the state legislature and said there needs to be more robust science-based standards to define proper protection of fish and game. And there also needs to be public notice on these permits and public process. So right now, Alaskans have no way of knowing when these habitat permits are being issued, and there's absolutely no process in for Alaskans whatsoever. So the legislature received that letter from the Board of Fish. The chair of the Fisheries Committee in the House, Representative Louis Stutes from Kodiak, introduced a bill that tried to do a lot of the things that the ballot initiative does. It was in the legislature for about 2 years and failed to move at all. It stayed in its the one committee where it was introduced and was never passed on. So it's become pretty obvious to me over all of these years of, trying from lots of different angles to work within the processes that exist that, basically the politicians are sort of too afraid to go up against the wants and the wills of the big industries that operate here in Alaska, and that the only way that this is going to happen would be if the people demand it. And so in that sense, we put an initiative on the ballot. There's 2 ways to make a law in Alaska. One would be through the state legislature, and the other is through an initiative by the citizens. We got nearly 50,000 signatures on the original petition to put an initiative on the ballot, which was well over the required amount. There is a lot of momentum and passion around this issue and this campaign amongst Alaskans, because I don't have to tell anyone on this call probably how important salmon are, in our lives. So that's kind of the story. The ballot initiative is going to do a few sort of key and main things, and I'll just see if I could cover those really quick. So one of the things is that it creates enforceable standards. And basically, if you read the language of the initiative, it talks about maintaining water quality, maintaining the quantity of water, so in-stream flow levels for fish, maintaining fish passage, maintaining the stream beds and banks and riparian areas that are needed to protect and support the sustainability of, salmon in Alaska. So I think that might be really the most important thing, where we will no longer have to wonder or argue what one politician or another is going to think proper protection means. We're going to understand and agree as Alaskans that it means you protect the water quality, you maintain the habitat, and you allow fish to migrate up and down streams as they need to do within their life cycle. Another thing that the initiative does that I think is really cool and, should have happened a long time ago is right now the way the law works, basically the state of Alaska assumes that all the water bodies in our state do not have salmon or anadromous fish species in them until the Department of Fish and Game goes out to those sites and does site-specific determinations to prove that they're fish. So basically, you don't even have to get fish habitat permits unless Fish and Game has been out to where you're operating and prove that there's fish. We're totally flipping that upside down and saying, hey, we know there's salmon in basically every water body in Alaska that's connected to the ocean, and so we should assume that they're there and have the project proponents or developers do the work to prove that they're not there if they don't want to have to get a fish habitat permit. Another thing the initiative does is right now, whether you're like building a remote cabin and need to, cross a stream, or you're the Pebble Mine or Donlin Mine, you're all in the same permitting process. So we are splitting that into two processes. One would be for minor permits, like when you need to cross a stream or put in a culvert or something like that. And then the other would be for major permits where you know that there's going to be significant adverse impacts to fish habitat. We give Alaskans a voice in permitting by requiring public notice and requiring an opportunity for public participation on the major permits. And I think I'll probably stop there because I know I've been talking a while, but I'm happy to take some questions if needed.
Great, Lindsay. Yeah, I'm so happy that we're leaving enough time for discussion at the end. I just want to say a few things before we begin our question time. Just a call to action, reminder of how important your voice is at this time, and that we at Alaska Community Action on Toxics invite you to get involved. We're planning some workshops in the region, and so if you're interested, you can contact Emily at 907-222-7714 or by email emily.k@akaction.org, and I'll include that information in a follow-up email as well. If you want to be involved locally in the Bethel area, a great place to start is by contacting the Yukon-Kuskokwim River Alliance. And again, I'll be sending the contact information in a follow-up. And another resource is the Northern Center, is they're working on this issue as well. And the contact there is Lachlan, the phone number 907-452-5021. So with that, let's open up the call for some of your questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *2 to unmute your line. And of course, the speakers, you should be unmuted so you can respond. Please also state your name and affiliation. And when you're finished, we'd appreciate it if you would mute your line again by pressing *2 so we don't end up with a lot of background noise. All right. Anybody like to ask a question or make a comment? Again, you would press *2.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Fran Salmon. Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Okay. This is Fran Solomon from Western Washington University near Seattle. I just have a question about the process that the mine would use to extract the gold. Would it be cyanidation?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the response.
Yeah, I heard yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Hello?
This is Grant. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, question for Tom. Tom, in Bethel, you were talking about the in perpetuity debate, or your question to DNR as to there's no walk away. How are you thinking about pursuing that?
Hey, Grant, this is Tom. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. We submitted comments on the draft reclamation proposals to DEC and DNR. The next step would be to wait and see them come out with their decision. Both DEC and DNR have to make separate decisions. DNR's is under its authorities for regulating mining in the state of Alaska, and those laws require a reclamation and closure plan. DEC operates under separate authority that gives it the responsibility to regulate waste disposal sites. And because there's an awful lot of waste disposal going on at the mine, they do that under their waste disposal regulation authorities. So they've worked together on this plan, but we'll make two separate decisions. So the next step would be, after we see those decisions come out, in both agencies, there's opportunities for a level of administrative appeal where you can ask for review of that decision by someone higher in the agency. And then if that avenue fails, you can appeal the decision to Superior Court. Those are options that we would consider as we evaluate what they say in their decision. But I would caution people that, as with so many of these things, the administrative agencies are given a lot of deference. They're given a lot of discretion to decide what does it mean to leave a site in a stable condition. And you and I might think that requiring water treatment in perpetuity does not leave it in a stable condition. The agency may conclude otherwise. And as a practical matter, as a legal matter, courts defer to agencies in their expertise and judgment if they've given good reasons and adequately explained themselves. So that's something we'll just have to evaluate and review when the decisions come out. Does that answer your question?
So, yeah, one other thing about this so I kind of think that if we could go through the legislature or somebody and have this in perpetuity water treatment outlawed like other states have, we wouldn't have this problem. And I think that's something we all need to think about going down the road, because stand for salmon, if it passes, will help. But if we could come in the back door and get in perpetuity outlawed, we might not have as much pushback as stand for salmon, but it would solve a lot of our problems. So we need to think about that as a group down the road through the legislature.
Well, that's a good point, and you're right. It would have to happen through the legislature, because what you're suggesting, outlawing water treatment in perpetuity, was actually one of the requirements in the Stand for Salmon initiative, and unfortunately that particular provision was struck out of the law by the Alaska Supreme Court, which held that that limitation was something that would violate the state constitution. I thought that decision was wrong, but that I'm not on the Supreme Court. And so any limitation like that, banning water treatment in perpetuity, that would have to be enacted by the legislature.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
So I've got one last thing to the group here. I've been working on this Donlin project for, since the beginning, since the 90s. And when the Northern Center started the Donlin Gold Working Group, we call in once a month. All of the people except for two of us were outside of the region, and they always asked us that, why can't we get the local people involved in this call-in? We feel funny, outsiders coming in and working on it. Up until recently, it was still all outsiders. And one of the problems, and I'm speaking about this for future projects that people in this group are working on, is how important it is to get the local people involved at the beginning. And the pushback we had from our local alphabet soup, like ABCP, ONC, the villages, is most of them said, well, we need to stay neutral, or we don't know enough, or the board of directors and stuff. So we have to remember that at the very beginning of all of these other projects, we have to figure out a way to get the local people involved, because the local people involvement here didn't start until this year. We didn't get any of the agencies to come forward and be against Donlin until just recently, and mainly from Danielle. And so we need to think about that going forward with the project coming up in Kotzebue and all these other big mines. So that's all I got.
Thank you. I want to give some other folks an opportunity to participate. So again, when you've done with your question, if you could press star 2 to mute your line again. And anyone who would like to, please remember to state your name and affiliation, and you press star 2 to unmute your line.
This is Rose. I'm calling from This is Rose Callisto. I wanted to say thank you for the call. And thank you, Grant, for bringing that up, because in 1999, when I started working for AVCP, was when we actually started having all these meetings, and I'm glad that Danielle actually started getting the community and the region involved. So this is not new. We've been trying to. We had a lot of regional informational conferences, meetings, trainings, you name it. We tried, and I just want to say thank you to Grant and Danielle for getting all this started here.
Thank you, Rose. Anyone else?
Yeah, hello, this is Dave Cannon in Antioch.
Hello?
Yep, hello, can you hear me? Dave Cannon in Antioch?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I guess maybe this question's for Tom. I signed on only at 9:30, so I might have missed some things. But I think in an email I saw here recently that Dave Chambers, in his analysis, said that the reclamation bond of like $318 million actually may be adequate. Is that correct?
Hey, Dave, this is Tom. It's partly correct, but not completely. He in his letter, his original financial analysis of the adequacy of the bond, he had included a number of inadequacies about it, one of which he now thinks was mistaken. The bond analysis put forward by Donlin's contractor had reported that the cost of reclamation would be $1.5 billion, and Dave couldn't see how a $320 million bond was possibly going to cover that, even with growth. And as a result of that hearing that took place in Bethel a couple weeks ago, we got some more information about how they calculated those numbers, both what the $1.5 billion meant and how the bond was calculated. And so Dave backed off of some of that criticism. There are still problems with the bond, the biggest one of which is that they've grossly understated indirect costs compared to other mines in the state. They've used a number of 30% for indirect costs, but experience with other mines shows that it typically runs much higher, more like 45%, and that makes a big difference. You know, they're lowballing things like administrative costs and things like that. So those concerns about the adequacy of the bond still remain, but not to the full extent of his original letter.
All righty, thanks.
Thank you. We probably have time for one or two more people before we wrap up the call.
Hi, Danielle. This is Allison Burchell calling you from Boulder, Colorado.
Hi, Allison.
And I am an isotope geochemist by training, but doing a lot of reclamation work and recovery work now. We have similar issues throughout the lower 48, you know, and I have I'm also in the process of taking Tom some law classes just so I can understand the gap between data, knowledge, information, and legal process, and how judges defer to state legislators. And I think this is the year, if any year. And Alaska is you guys are on a good track to be another demonstration for the fact that, as Grant and some others have mentioned, this is the year for local solutions. This is the generation moving in that requires data and information, and I think more work on the reclamation bond, based on all my experiences, is going to be really important moving forward, in addition to all the other great work you guys have gone on and done. But I wonder how you're going to move forward without strong county commissioner, support, because that's sort of that's the local level where you can really hold things up. No surprise that state legislatures are in a kind of a state of inaction also right now, particularly up there. So I just would love to hear a little bit more about what authority your local, regional county commissioners and agencies have, and what they can do to keep the process going.
I'm not sure who the best person is to respond to that. We have boroughs. Is that a question for Tom, Mary?
I can comment on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Grant. We do not have boroughs or counties. We're unorganized borough. So the next higher farm is the legislature. So the local people don't have really anybody to go to that way.
This is Tom. Yeah, that's right. And there used to be more opportunity. There used to be a coastal zone management program in Alaska that actually gave local governments some authority to be able to make some choices about decisions that would be made in the coastal zone. And during the Murkowski administration, when Frank Murkowski was our governor, they did away with the coastal zone management program. And so that took away one significant local voice that existed. And as a result, that's right. The decisions here are being made by state and federal agencies. And as you heard Mary say, it's just been terribly frustrating for the local people. You heard Mary and Grant and Rose all say how frustrating this has been for the local people. They don't feel like they've had a real adequate opportunity to participate in and influence these decisions.
So, Tom, that was my next question. I was to ask about coastal commissions. Sorry, I'm just completely new to this whole process. Oh man, I'm sorry.
we are just about out of time. But if Tom, if you want to respond to this final question, then I would like to give Mary and Lindsay also an opportunity to say any final words before I close out the call. Allison, were you going to ask a question? Uh-oh. Anybody there?
Yes, this is me, Mary.
Hi, Mary. I'm sorry, it seems we lost that other question, but would you like to make any final remarks before we close the call out for today?
Yes. I also wanted to let y'all know that I've reached out to Byron Moses and Olivia Shields. They're with the I Sing You dance. And, we're still planning on, building this group larger and making people more aware. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
I'll also add a question for Lindsay. With this, what I just shared, who, if we do put a video together, then who would, be taking that video and airing it out, in the public?
Me.
Who's me?
It's Lindsay. Yeah,
Okay.
Mary, anything you get, I will ensure gets distributed through Stand for Salmon's media channels. And if you want to talk to me, we can certainly connect offline about some of the ideas you have in mind there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
For those of you who I'll just, in my closing, just for those of you who aren't in Alaska, I think we're feeling a very great sense of urgency around this ballot initiative. Some of the questions that have come up for Tom, some of the things like perpetual remediation, local government input and control over some of these things are exactly the kinds of issues that the ballot measure looks to address, will address, and we have exactly 56 days. We need 147,000 Alaskans to vote yes. We are grossly outgunned by our opposition, which includes some of your favorite, multinational global corporations like ConocoPhillips, British Petroleum, the Pebble Partnership. Donlin Gold has actually been one of the top contributors to trying to prevent the Citizens Initiative from passing. I think they've put in several million at this point. Our opposition has raised over 10 million as compared to, our small grassroots donations from thousands of Alaskans and other individuals. So we think we can win, and we are going to win by direct voter contact and Alaskans talking to Alaskans, and hopefully Alaskans getting very, very sick and tired of and seeing through the $10 million worth of glitzy advertising crap that's all over their internets, TVs, and basically everywhere they look. They've got it on buses in Anchorage, et cetera. And I think the reason that the opposition is so concerned is not so much because this is going to stop all development in Alaska. It's not going to do that. It is going to require that they develop more responsibly and don't have the total free-for-all that they have been enjoying here since statehood. But they're freaked out because their polling's telling us what our polling's telling us, which is that we have a really good shot of winning if we can get good voter turnout on election day. And so if you're not in Alaska, we've like $5 helped put up 2 yard signs. We need any contributions we can get. And if you are in Alaska, call me, let's figure out how your voice, your organization, your neighborhood association, whatever, how we can support you in talking to your friends and neighbors and making sure Alaskans understand what the issue is all about.
Thank you, Lindsay. Tom, did you want to we're going over a little bit, but I would like to give you the opportunity to say any final words you might have before I close out the call.
I have no final words. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank all of the participants who called in today, and especially our speakers for your time, Mary, Lindsay, and Tom. Thank you so much. Our next call is on Wednesday, October 10th with Carrie Gillum, author of Whitewash, The Story of a Weed Killer, Cancer and the Corruption of Science. And she'll be talking about her investigative book in which she exposes how Monsanto whitewashed the scientific data on the herbicide glyphosate, which is a key ingredient in Roundup, to validate its safety. So I'll be sending, actually, I think it went out while we were on this call, an invitation for you to register for that call.
Danielle, this is Rose. I wanted to let you know, too, that we're expecting to hear from Winona LaDuke for the Indigenous Women's Conference in November. If you could call me at ADCP, I would really appreciate it.
Okay, I'll try to get that message to Danielle. I don't actually believe Danielle's on the phone. She is a teacher and had to teach right now. So somebody in our office will help connect you. So thank you. If you have any I'm sorry. If you have additional questions or comments, please feel free to contact our office at 907-222-7714. And I just want to thank everyone again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.